Welcome back, everybody. Another video here on power supply. Today's topic is going to be emergency preparedness. Joining me, as always, Bartel, Suzi Collins. And this is a timely one because Brian, and I realize this will go out long after we do the recording, maybe a couple of months. But as we sit here today, crazy weather storm patterns going across the country. You actually posted on LinkedIn that there was a great deal of snow and ice and flights were grounded, and just really the impact on transportation, etc., really makes this emergency preparedness conversation kind of timely because you're living through it right now. So I want to welcome you both. And Brian, maybe you could talk about the snow and ice and how you're getting through over there on the other side of the country from me.
Thanks, Justin. Yeah. You never really know what's going to happen, right? Now, here in the Pacific Northwest, I grew up in Eastern Oregon where snow and ice, like that's a routine thing. But out here in the Willamette Valley, that we just don't have the resources when this stuff happens. So definitely a challenge. And then you start realizing too, just the things that you take for granted. Like we've got some people that are on my team that are going to be without power for a week or a week and a half. And you start thinking, what would I do without power for a week and a half? The Springfield is the utility district. They also just put in a boil water. So think about that. If you've got to boil your water for safety and you don't have power, you've really got to start getting creative. So from a hospital perspective, obviously our doors stay open, and that's when you really start getting challenges with how much stock are you keeping. Obviously through COVID, we learned that we need to keep extra, but really how much extra should you keep? When trucks aren't running, UPS, FedEx isn't delivering, it makes things very challenging. And the hospital is a place where people go for safety and health. So again, definitely a challenge, but it's just amazing to see the different teams, the clinical teams step up, everybody, doing whatever they can just to make sure that patients are taken care of. But kind of eye-opening too.
Well, before we dive in a little bit deeper into the whole nuances of making sure you have enough stock on hand for these scenarios and how you deal with challenges related to even access, right? Like patients even coming in for care, not so much in the acute setting, but what about, other outpatient type of appointments, et cetera, that may be, occurring as well. That also becomes a challenge. Suzi, you don't really have a lot of problems with snow and ice though in your neck of the woods, do you?
Yeah, our biggest problem is people believing that we have a problem because we're not being impacted by the weather, right? So when we have to say it didn't come FedEx, I'm sorry, I know we were expecting it, but it's not here. It's a little harder for them to understand because we're in Arizona where, it was 50 degrees and sunny yesterday. So, it's sometimes hard to understand it when you're not living in it. But we're definitely feeling it as well. So even though trucks can move throughout Arizona and we're not having any flight delays, we're being impacted by those flight delays from other parts of the country. And manufacturers are everywhere. So it's sometimes we get that look like, what? Because we don't have the weather here. They don't always understand when things happen in Memphis, it impacts us in Arizona greatly.
Yeah, it's different maybe when you start telling people that, the water is low in the Panama Canal. Everybody can really kind of anchor on that. Like, okay, only so many ships can move through there. Or, we've got a ship that was grounded in the Suez Canal. Like these things actually happened over the last several years. And I feel like even though they're very remote to people working, in the hospitals or this area of the globe, I think everybody's really familiar with how that might impact shipping channels. But when you start talking about drilling that down further, it's not a surprise, Suzi, to your point. They're like, what do you mean the trucks aren't moving? The trucks are, everybody's on the roads just fine here in Phoenix. Like, I don't get what you're saying. And yeah, I think just that is the nature of the chain in supply chain.
Right. And we'll feel it. So it's happening right now. And yes, things that we expected either next day or 2 day happen. But the other thing that's going to happen is our distribution center, we're fine right now, right? When we're going to see that is 2 weeks from now when they didn't get those trucks this week, right? So the impact is going to have a longer term effect even once the weather's better. It's going to be catching up even the distribution centers. So again, it's just a hard thing to understand for the lay person in the building.
Yeah, there's a really interesting if you go to FedEx.com, I forget the gentleman that started FedEx, but it's pretty cool. He in college actually wrote a paper about the hub and spoke model, where instead of transporting from point A to point B, now they'll go to a hub, and then that hub services multiple locations from there. So Memphis, Tennessee is obviously one of the biggest FedEx hubs. I think they have 9 or 10 throughout the. Don't quote me on that, but again, check it out. It's pretty cool. Maybe you can put a link in there because there's just a quick little 1-minute video that talks about how many packages are processed out of these. And so to Suzi's point, that's really what, the interconnectedness, it's amazing how efficient those channels are. And that's why it's become like so prominent. But if something happens, again, Tennessee, not really known for terrible weather most of the time, but because of the, everything that's happening down there, it's impacting nationwide. So again, a good call out too, Suzi, is just understanding, we talk about the need to understand where our materials are sourced from. It's also important to know where things are traveling. And again, I don't think in our seats, we really have that much visibility either to see where a package, the shipping path for that.
It's interesting, Brian, like, I think awareness is like a big part of it, to sort of anticipate. What are you expecting from your supplier partners or your distributor partners in terms of communication around the deliveries as well? Like, are you looking for daily updates? Do you have mechanisms in place? Even as Suzi was talking about, it's not today that we're going to see it. It's in 2 weeks when everybody thinks that the issue is over, that's actually the lag time that occurs, as a result of the delays. I'm assuming that there's also maybe some, not just communication between you and the supplier, but also to those end users who, while it may seem that the risk has passed where you are experiencing the weather in your neck of the woods, Brian, and people can understand that, it's like, why is this a problem? That ended 2 weeks ago. So it's not just educating yourself, it's educating the people around you.
Correct. And that's, definitely with our critical key suppliers, we are having, daily conversations with them about, how they're going to help support. Again, when the main I-5 down from Portland is, it's been on standstill traffic, we understand that there's just limited things that they can assist with. But again, having that communication. And again, remember when something like this happens too, is that you start using things that you don't normally use to that level. When you've got a lot of hip, ankle, knee, wrist fractures coming in, that really starts draining even things like DME. DME is something that we currently use a third-party provider for. And when the entire area has all of these people coming into the ER because of fractures, those supplies just aren't there in a large geographical area. I mean, I was talking with some of my colleagues, even up north, Portland, Salem, are dealing with the same things just because of the volumes that are coming through. So definitely puts a strain on that entire geographical area. It's not always just a localized. But then to Suzi's point, I don't know, if you're looking for slings, maybe that's something that might start impacting other people too. It just depends on what that upstream supply chain looks like.
Yeah. Hey guys, believe it or not, I actually have a real life emergency. So I am at the hospital. I do actually have to drop off, and it is about something that did not come in. So I get to go have a real life conversation about this, but I do actually have to drop.
All right.
So please continue, keep this in, and I will talk to you guys in 2 weeks. Sorry about that.
This is the nature of it. You could not have highlighted the discussion today better, Suzi.
Can't
A
make
real
this
life.
stuff up.
Yeah, you can't
Right?
make
I
it
am
up.
so
That's
sorry. I
hilarious.
apologize if I just came in, so I will talk to you guys soon.
All right,
Thanks,
sounds
Suzi.
good,
Bye.
Suzi.
Hope it works out.
Now I want to know if she could tie it to the weather patterns up there.
Yeah, it's a good follow-up. It's a good follow-up.
It is, yeah. So Brian, as we kind of talk about that too, like the impact of, those products, et cetera, like you were highlighting DME equipment, and there's some seasonality there, right? And so, yes, that could still impact maybe somebody in Phoenix, Arizona getting those supplies, but they may not be seeing the same spike that you are. And that's really where you're talking about that regional supply. Do you, and or to your awareness, your suppliers and distributors plan for that seasonality to some extent and stock up during the times of the year when there's going to be some inclement weather, and maybe the risk of falls is greater, et cetera?
So for like routine items that probably all hospitals think about, like flu masks, patient masks, staff masks, those sort of things, yes, we definitely plan for seasonality. But these are the things that unfortunately a lot of, and again, I hate to admit this, I'm sure on the supplier side, I would assume that they have better planning, demand planning than what we have. But again, it's really just learning that from a personal standpoint too, your own professional development. Once this starts happening, this is something that's going to stick with me. It's like, all right, if I know that there's bad weather, I've got to be working with our third party DME to make sure that we've got adequate stock. Things like that. I mean, honestly, it hadn't even crossed my mind before, which sounds silly, but again, hindsight's 2020. So I think that these are things that we need to learn from. And again, hopefully these types of conversations that we have and then share out through LinkedIn and social media, other people start having those conversations too. And if people have ideas about what they can do, I would appreciate it. Unfortunately, we use like a 3-month rolling average that helps determine our stock levels. I've thought about throwing seasonality into that, but it gets just so difficult with, again, our data is just not as clean as we would like it. And it's hard to predict. Again, it's not like typical sales cycles. You never really know what's going to happen in your community and come to your hospital. You've got to be prepared for that. I'm glad that we've upped our on-hand quantities that we keep in our storeroom. Again, I feel like we've got an ample buffer. We haven't received UPS, FedEx, and we seem to be holding okay. But again, as the days go on, that gets more challenging. So really having that adequate stock, I think that we've learned a lot through COVID too, having that, at least 96 hours, if not, a week or two's worth of stock, and in some cases, a couple months. It'll help you out in the long run too.
So, not to minimize the weather patterns that are impacting your region, but this is kind of the run-of-the-mill emergency, right? This is an expected one, and that's, really what led to my question around seasonality and how you plan for that. And you're right, good data would help you maybe plan a little bit differently in the way that you look at how you're going to stock and how much, and that 3-month average like you were talking about. But then there are some bigger emergencies, and we'll kind of end on this one, but bigger emergencies that maybe can't be expected seasonally, that, just a catastrophe essentially, or some type of catastrophic event. I'm sure that your emergency response and preparedness committees and teams are planning, even for this seasonality to be expected, and the great catastrophes that could potentially come, or even another COVID, like you said, lots of lessons learned there. But what is your involvement, and what would you say, in talking to colleagues around the country, what's your involvement with those emergency response and disaster teams for planning, and how often do you meet? What are some best practices maybe for supply chain frontline workers and leaders out there to be kind of thinking about?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we do set up incident command. And so that's one of my roles, is to work as the logistics chief, which helps, transport things, whether that's supplies, equipment, materials. We always do a pretty good debrief after something like this happens. We do planning exercises, which is always great. Unfortunately, it is just a challenge sometimes too, right? And that's where you really get to see, again, I don't want to undermine the importance of human ingenuity. It's just amazing to see a hospital come together, everybody supporting each other, supporting the patients during extremely critical, high stress times. But again, having that framework for incident command, emergency preparedness, we do have a role specifically for emergency preparedness. I mean, they put on some really good training. They work with the county, the city, the state. And so all of that goes into help prepare as well.
How interesting is it that sometimes those challenging times bring out the best in the team and actually bring the team closer together, overcoming a challenge like that? I'm glad that you debrief, because no matter what your plan is, there's always room for improvement, and taking that, okay, the immediate emergency is over, but let's not forget what happened here and how we can improve, our plan or our process. So, Brian, really appreciate you coming on and finishing this out. How serendipitous? I don't know if it's serendipitous, but it's just so interesting that Suzi would literally have that emergency come up right in the middle to just put that point of emphasis on our topic today. I absolutely love it. Would you add anything before we wrap up?
No, I would just say that, I think anybody that's in supply chain always deals with the same thing that Suzi had come up. Again, we've got to drop what we have. That becomes the next fire, something that we've got to do whatever we can to make sure that item, supply, equipment, whatever it is, arrives, or help find solutions. So again, it's never a dull moment, Justin, as you know. So I hope everything worked out well with Suzi. And again, everybody that's watching this probably is like, wow, that happened to me this week or last week. So
yeah. Well, all right, everybody. Stay tuned. If you're liking these videos, head on over to our YouTube channel. Make sure that you like and subscribe, and definitely share it with your colleagues. If you're finding us on LinkedIn, if you're already on YouTube, we'd love to see a comment on this video. More to come. Definitely connect with Brian and Suzi on LinkedIn, and Suzi's got a lot of great content coming out on TikTok as well, really highlighting what it's like working on the front lines on a regular basis. And of course, follow us here at Power Supply. You can definitely download the smartphone app for the podcast to iPhone or Android. Just simply search for Power Supply in the app marketplace or Apple Podcasts. So thank you, everybody, for checking out this week's video.